Sometimes the solution you're avoiding could be the cure to all your story problems. Today you'll learn from Chris Sanders, an incredibly talented storyteller, illustrator, and voice actor, writer and director of Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, The Croods, and more. Chris will guide you through his creative process, explaining why writing for animation is not so different from writing for live action. He'll teach you about character-led storytelling and discuss the challenges he faced adapting the How to Train Your Dragon books. Chris also shares his thoughts on live-action remakes and the role of AI in animation. And if you stick to the end, he'll give you valuable advice on how to stay motivated even when things get tough. Chris, welcome to Write for Animation. It is so great to get to chat with you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm very grateful that you got some time to chat with us.
Yeah, let's do it.
What is the difference between writing for live action and writing for animation?
I don't think it's that different these days. One of the things I think that is the wrong way to think is to actually think about it as animation. Everything now is animated in a way. Live action has tons of animation, and animation has become much, much more sophisticated. We have had writers come into Disney and into DreamWorks, and a lot of times it really doesn't work out because they are thinking that it's an animated film, so I'm going to write differently. And so they will either maybe impoverish things a bit. They're maybe thinking that it's for kids, and so we're going to have to really make it slow, or maybe just add some stuff that's uncomfortable, like maybe it's a little maybe dopey, if you will. I think the biggest mistake you can make is like thinking that you're doing something for animation. You know what? Animation or live action, no matter what, it's all a story. Be true to your story. Treat it seriously. Now, if you're writing a really broad physical kind of thing, Bugs Bunny, Warner Brothers, like one of those kind of things, then yes, try to lean into that animated thing. I've been working in features, and mostly we're dealing with universal themes and very serious things. And the funny thing is, nobody really thinks of it as animation. And I think as a writer, again, don't think of it as animation, just attend to the story, attend to the needs of the story, treat it seriously. Don't dumb it down. Don't make it really slow. Don't get into your head that this thing is just for little kids, unless you're doing something that is just for little kids, if that makes sense. Most of the time, we are working to not exclude. People say like, well, how do you write something for kids and adults? Like, we're just writing for ourselves. We are writing things that sometimes kids will get something, sometimes they won't. I watch movies all the time, and once in a while I'm like, I don't understand what they're talking about, but it doesn't bother me. So it's okay for things to go over kids' heads now and then. So work to not exclude anyone from your audience. Make things accessible, make things smart, make them dramatic, make them compelling. This is the word that I want you to come away with. If you come away with nothing else, don't think relatable. This is a word that has been used too much. It is a worthless word. Things do not need to be relatable. I watched the movie A Perfect Storm. I have never been a fisherman. I have never been out in the ocean fishing for swordfish. I have never had any of the experiences that anybody in that film had, but I was compelled. I was so into the characters and the story and what they were doing, and it introduced a new world to me. No one can relate to anything in a Star Wars movie. We don't have speeders, we don't have lightsabers, we don't have to worry about a giant, like, malevolent force that's trying to destroy our planet, but they are compelling. Don't worry about relatable. I think it's been overused.
That's fantastic. I would love to connect this next question with some examples from Lilo and Stitch. And this comes from the great guys from Animation. It's a great YouTube channel as well. And he asks, what's your approach to character-led storytelling rather than events?
I work with people who are very good at structure. Dean Deblois, one of my partners, is very good at structure. Actually, working with my wife, Jessica Steele Sanders, she also is very good at structure. I think you are either an architect or a gardener. Gardeners like me, I tend to just get into the story and I just start writing and storyboarding and starting feeling my way through things. That's not necessarily a great way to go. It's okay if you have a structure first. I really believe in, like, when things like Lilo and Stitch came along, it started with a character. It's okay to start with a character. I had this character in my head, this little sort of monster, and I wanted to do a story surrounding him. That's where this whole thing began. With Lilo and Stitch, it is a story of a villain that becomes a hero. That is at the very core and the very base of the whole story. And that all came out of my experience at Disney, where I'd worked on many films. where there was a villain and we had to dispatch them at the end, and they got what they deserved and they were killed and they were gone. And it began to get into my head, like, well, what if instead of killing a villain, we redeemed them? And that became something that I really was obsessed with. So that, at its core, is where Lilo and Stitch started, with a character. And that's a great place to start, because that is hopefully compelling, a character whose journey is compelling. Now, the moment you get that character and you get some things down, you get this list of things that you want to accomplish, stop worrying about the character and start thinking about structure. If you can create a very simple, strong structure, a 3-act structure, if it holds up the basic story, that's the architecture, then you can go back to character, you can go back to the gardening, and once I know a sequence is in the right place, and I know where the sequence stops and starts and what must become in that sequence, then I can relax and be more organic and like feel my way through this moment. It's both things at once. Beginning with characters is a great place to begin, because you want your character to be fresh and compelling and have an interesting journey.
Absolutely love it. Now we have a question that screenwriter Michael Arndt, he told me you should ask this to every single guest. What was the hardest story problem to figure out for How to Train Your Dragon? And what have you learned from it as a storyteller?
This is a great question to come exactly at this moment. So my experience with How to Train Your Dragon, I was asked to come onto the film late in the process. They had already been working on the movie. They had designed the characters, and they had written and storyboarded and created story reels, I think a year or so before I was even asked to come on. And they felt like the film wasn't working. So I was asked to come in and take it over and see if I could give it a go. I knew nothing about it. I got the book and I got the story reel. I read the book by Cressida Cal, and then I watched the story reel, and I immediately saw what I thought was the short circuit, if you will, that was causing the trouble. So I called my friend, Dean Deblois, who we had partnered before on Mulan and on Lilo and Stitch. And I said, what are you doing? You got some free time? You want to come over and co-direct on this thing? And he said, yes. And so we got together, and here's the problem we saw. In the book, there is a contradiction. The Vikings in that book are at war with dragons, but they also collect dragon eggs as teenagers, and they raise the dragons inside, and that was confusing to me. Either you are at war with the creature, or you have a symbiotic relationship, like a cowboy with a horse. You raise it from a foal, and you put a saddle on it, and you then ride it, and you have this relationship, or you're at war with them. So that was the problem. We had to choose one or the other. So what happened was we sat down with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he had lunch with Dean and I. He said, we usually make these films about 3 times. We only have time to make this one once. We are out of time, and you've got to get it right the first time. So what Dean and I did was we got an old-fashioned chalkboard. We ordered it. It came into the studio, and we would meet with Jeffrey almost every day. And we would present something and ask a question and make a decision and move on. And I'll give you an example. Exactly what we were just talking about. Dragons and Vikings are at war with one another, or dragons and Vikings have a symbiotic relationship. Jeffrey came in and we said, all right, these are the 2 choices we have. And we said, we think that the at war one is a lot more compelling. It has more energy. And he said, agreed, that one. And we said, great. We erased the version where dragons and Vikings are symbiotic. And we said, okay, they're at war. Next step. So basically what we did, because Jeffrey said you have a chance to get this done once, rather than jump into any sort of details and worry about any character, we basically think of it as a car in a shop. We took that car apart. We took it apart down to the frame. We took the wheels off, the engine, everything. We just went right down to the frame and said, we're going to take everything apart. We're going to put it together piece by piece by piece. And we are not going to contradict ourselves. Every time we make a decision, we're going to say, yes, we're going to move forward. So dragons and Vikings, they're at war. Next, in the book, Hiccup raises Toothless. And Toothless is this cute little tiny dragon. He's really small. He's a little small dragon, and Toothless and Hiccup become partners in the story. And our whole thing was, all right, either he befriends this dragon, or he finds a dragon that is the most dangerous dragon in their world, and he has to keep it secret. And we were like, obviously, we all picked, and Jeffrey picked, obviously, he catches a dragon, and he has to keep it secret. A forbidden friendship. And again, that's a lot of energy. There's an energy source to that. The next problem was Toothless himself. The Toothless in the book is a dragon in the movie. You may not realize it. They had already built and rigged Toothless. He is what they call a terrible terror in the movie. Mm-hmm. There's a scene in the first film where Toothless and Hiccup are sitting on a beach and they're eating fish, and Toothless is enjoying this fish dinner, and these little tiny dragons land, and they're like almost like little seagulls, and they're bothering Toothless, trying to get his fish, and Toothless blows a little piece of fire and backs all these guys away. That's the Toothless from the book. Those little dragons are multiple versions of the actual Toothless as described in the book, and that was the version they tried to make the movie with. And now you can see why they were having trouble. That little dragon is cute. It's not scary at all. It's not intimidating. So the next thing that Dean and I decided was, we have to rebuild Toothless and reconceive him. So we came back to Jeffrey and said, if he's going to find a dragon and befriend it, that dragon has to be the most dangerous dragon of all. So we created the concept of a Night Fury. I actually named it. I remember the day I was writing in the script and I was like, I have to rename this dragon. I call it Night Fury. It only attacks rarely. It's the one that they fear the most. And then we designed him to be like the sports car of dragons. The other dragons in the movie had these large, kind of thin, wispy shapes, and they were very drawn out and stuff. And I was very interested in Dean as well, in making a more compact, powerful, kind of like the Corvette of dragons. And then we decided to make him all black because he only flies at night. And so he's basically invisible. And Jeffrey thought this is great. And so we had to redesign and rebuild, re-rig, and surface a brand new dragon in record time. Usually they have about a year to get one of these things going. We had only 1 month. Wow. So Toothless in the film was created in about 1 month and ready to go. We brought all the artists who were working on the film into a theater, and we did a big presentation where we pitched back to them the version of the movie that we intended to make. We said, this is the version Jeffrey likes, this is what we're going to make. And to their credit, nobody freaked out. We were throwing away 2/3 of the film. Oh, and actually, I think we threw away almost 80% of the film, which was more than they said we were allowed to do. They said, you can only redo like 1/3 of the film. And we threw almost the entire film out and just started from scratch. Mm-hmm. But that was the biggest story problem in How to Train Your Dragon, like pretty much the whole basic concept. So we changed the basic concept. We kept the idea that dragons and Vikings were at war, and we changed Toothless entirely. And once we changed Toothless, everything started to light up. The story started to work. It started to make sense. Suddenly, it was compelling and it had energy. So what I learned, in conclusion, it is okay to treat your story like a mechanical thing, a dispassionate, all right, is this a story about a guy who opens a donut shop, or is this about a guy who finds an alien? And you're like, I'm going to go with alien. That's the whole thing. Reducing it to its framework and working on the framework is the best thing you can do. Because if you can get that, then you can have all the fun in the world. Think of it as like a Christmas tree. If you can get that Christmas tree stable and simple, then you can decorate it. Then you can do stuff with character and ridiculous, silly dialogue, and you can introduce anomalies that make no sense because they're hung on a strong structure. So think about your structure. I know it doesn't sound glamorous. It's just like having a house. Get the structure right, the house is going to hold together.
Absolutely love it, Chris. You have no idea how this resonates with me, because I believe that sometimes we have so many options, tangled wires and threads, and it's about following one and see where that leads, like this A and B. Is it this or that? Otherwise, everything works and everything doesn't work at the same time. And yeah,
I think Pixar simplicity is strength. Their movies are not impoverished, but they are simple and strong. You can describe the movie to somebody usually very quickly. Oh, Finding Nemo, you can describe that pretty easily. And that's compelling. Okay.
Now a question from Cesar. What's your process for selecting the right idea, and what are the core steps to develop it into a script and a final animatic before production?
I look for something that I feel like I can contribute to. I want to look for a story that has a lot of emotional content. That is where I gravitate. I love the emotional wavelengths of a film. And so I'm looking for a character that is sympathetic and powerful. So I want to stretch my wings and I want to do new and different things, but I also want to look for something that I will be able to handle. So if I'm good at flying airplanes, I will try to find an airplane to fly and not a boat to drive. I'm working on the movie called The Wild Robot. And the thing I really liked about the property, I read the book and I liked the emotional core that was inside it. And I thought, okay, this is something I think I can bring this to the screen. I think this is in my sort of wheelhouse. You don't have to look for something that you're familiar with. I don't have to look for a story about a guy who grew up in Colorado that wanted to be a cartoonist. That was me. I want to look for things that resonate with me.
Well, now you have both Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon are being made into live action films. What was your first reaction when you heard the news?
I think when you work in animation, hearing that is always a little bit hard, to be honest. I would use Lion King as an example. When I heard they were doing that, the first thought in my head was, we did it right the first time. And there was an interesting moment because I had in this interview, a guy called me up and basically had this entire interview. How do you feel about this? And it was interesting because I said, well, there's a frustrating aspect to this because we did it right the first time. There is no need to redo it, right? So that's frustrating. But then on top of it, the finished film was almost shot for shot the movie that we made. So the weird thing is, rather than being upset by that, I suddenly was on the opposite side going, I'm glad they copied it because we got it right the first time. Now, an exception to this, so Lion King is a weird one. They're all a little weird. It's always a little weird. My feeling about, like, for example, Little Mermaid, when I was watching it, I saw it twice. Something crystallized in my head. I think one of the challenges of bringing an animated film to live action is the budget. Okay, the under the sea sequence in Little Mermaid. That was a lavish, colorful, sumptuous sequence that had a lot of characters and fun. And when I watched the live action one, I was aware of, oh, they hit a limitation. They couldn't build enough unique characters and they couldn't populate the screen like we did. That screen was full of color and characters that were crossing and stuff like that. And what they had to do, which I understand, they had to make like a lot of jellyfish and a lot of brittle stars, and they made a lot of sea turtles. But the general population of that sequence was really low. And so it didn't have that explosion of energy and stuff that the animated one did. So they were really limited, frankly, by their budget. So every single one of these is a unique case. In the case of How to Train Your Dragon, Dean is directing it. That's a good idea. The person who did it originally should direct it. Because I guarantee, just like me, I guarantee there were frustrations while making the animated version because there were limitations. And the idea of doing it live action, the first thing that's going to go into your head is like, oh, I know exactly what I do because we were not able to do these things, but now we can do these things. And I also think that the original filmmakers, they understand the property. When we were working on Mulan, it was the hardest film I've ever worked on. And the hardest part of it was Mulan's character and trying to figure out how she worked. Because within Disney at the time, we had Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid. And so we had a series of movies where there was a female protagonist, a female lead, who was dissatisfied with where she was and she wanted to change things. So when we started Mulan, the first set of writers, and we dealt with this for over a year. It was a long time before one day I woke up and a light bulb went on above my head and I was like, oh my God, I know what the problem is. In the movie that we were working on, the original movie, the one you never saw because we changed it, Mulan was betrothed to somebody and she didn't want to be in an arranged marriage because the writers from the modern world were like, a woman would never want to be in an arranged marriage. That's horrible. So when war broke out and her father was called to war, when Mulan stole the armor and left, the problem with the story is that she was leaving because it was convenient to get away from an arranged marriage. So it ruined and watered down the main idea, which is she went to war even though it would ruin her relationship with her family and her dad. She loved her father so much that she was willing to destroy her relationship with him to save his life. That's the core of the story. Okay, so we didn't want her to be like, oh, I was born like a martial arts expert in this role that I've been forced into, and this war is a convenience to finally get out of here. That's what we avoided. One day I came in the studio and I talked to the producer and I said, you know what? I know the problem. The only story we should be doing is the story of a girl who loved her father so much that she was willing to destroy her relationship with him, her country, and her family to save his life. She valued his life above everything else. That's the story we're doing. And if anything else is getting in the way of that, today I'm going to kill every other storyline. The writers were like, so the arranged marriage? And I said, no more arranged marriage gone. She's leaving because she wants to save her father. And they were like, okay, so the whole thing with the matchmaker, or she doesn't want to go to the matchmakers. I said, nope, she wants to go to the matchmaker. Believe it or not, we must make a movie about a girl who is 100% okay with an arranged marriage. It doesn't mean she's good at it. She can still be a really fun character and she can screw up in front of the matchmaker. She can be an interesting, awkward character, but she cannot be a martial arts expert and she cannot be against an arranged marriage. And that really blew their minds. They're like, well, how can she be okay with an arranged marriage? I'm like, because if she isn't, it ruins the movie. So it's mechanical. She's okay with the arranged marriage. In the live action film, young Mulan was a martial arts expert. She was like flying on the rooftops and doing tumbles and fighting and doing these things. And they were like, Mulan, you mustn't do this, la, la, la. They stepped into the exact thing that we avoided. We got it right. And I
Yeah,
thought, the moment I heard they were doing a Mulan movie, first thing I thought was, I'll bet you anything that they're going to take the easy route and go like, see, she's a warrior. She was born a warrior and she's never going to get a chance. Oh my gosh, she got a chance. So when she left to save her father, was she leaving to save her father, or was she leaving because she was finally going to get out of this village that was keeping her down? That was the problem.
there's a theme of simplicity that I see. Simplicity and making bold choices of cutting things that have been there for a while in the story.
Exactly. And that thing that the boomerang line that I was using with my writers and everybody else on Mulan, which is, nope, this is the story of a girl who goes to war to save her father because she loves him so much. That's our story. Boom. Anything else is not your story. So get rid of it. So that's the kind of things, like, we understood that movie and that story because we had worked for years to figure it out. And when it hit live action, I have no idea what was going on. I don't know the personalities. I don't know anything about it. I know nothing. But all I know is the finished film, they, I think, made an error. They were all excited about, like, yeah, she's going to be a warrior. They weren't thinking clearly. We knew the movie really well. Now, somebody in live action could have done a great job with it, but I think they were like leaning into, I don't know, not easy things, but I think
safe maybe for,
yeah, like, in our society, we're all like, oh,
and
women
to
shouldn't
these.
be treated like they are second-class citizens. Like, you don't put them in a box. And I totally get that. That's good. But in that movie, in that story, yeah, she should be relatively okay with being in that box and trying really hard so that when her father is in trouble and she needs to leave, it's a sacrifice. It's a risk. If you're a ninja and a martial arts expert, going to war is not a risk. But as a woman, if she was caught, she'd be in trouble. Like, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But the reasons that she's going are now cloudy.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, go back to the original, at least go back to the original filmmakers and take them to dinner. Have a few whiskeys and a glass of wine and some salmon and talk it through. Tap us. Ask us how we made it, why we made it. The people who made this stuff are not only really smart, they are smart. There are multiples of them because I don't make these movies up on my own. I have hundreds of artists, story artists and editors that are helping me. And so that accumulation of brain power is what makes these things work. Yeah, if you're going to do a live action film of something that somebody's already done, go talk to them. Just take them to dinner. Maybe they'll say something that could really help you out. Anyway.
It's also, at some point, you find a theme. You mentioned the sentence that becomes the North Star for your movie. Is that part of how you see the process, or what is your approach to theme?
Absolutely. Theme has always been a little odd to me. Be true to yourself is usually, every film is like almost the same theme. It's like, and then like, what's the theme of Indiana Jones? I don't know.
Yeah.
But story with Lilo and Stitch, like every movie I've ever worked on, the theme and the story is clarified as you work on it. The first version of Lilo and Stitch that we put up, it was certainly a villain that was becoming a hero, but we realized, oh my gosh, we didn't ever figure out why he becomes a hero. Like, what is the reason that he changes from bad to good? And so the next step after we put the film up for the first time was to figure that out. And what we came upon was the idea of,
Ohana means family. Family means nobody gets left behind.
So Stitch didn't start as an experiment. In the first version of the story, he was just an alien who was the leader of a gang, and he crash landed on Earth, and he was biding his time until his gang could get there, and he was going to create mayhem. And in one of our meetings, after one of our screenings, Roy Disney, in fact, he was just to my left, I'll never forget, he said, I liked Stitch when I thought he was a baby, but when I realized he was a grown-up and ran a gang, I didn't like him as well. And live in that meeting, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was thinking, oh my gosh, the whole thing is falling apart. And I started thinking, and I thought, okay, he is handled by guys wearing hazmat suits, and they move him around in a little jar because we had that much already boarded. And I said, and the room was really quiet. And I kept talking, and I said, they treat him almost like he's a virus, and the equivalent of a virus would be a genetic mutation. And the room stayed really quiet. And then I turned to Tom Schumacher and I said, what if he was considered so dangerous because he was a one-off, a mutation that was created in a lab, and they didn't know what to do with him? And he was like, do that. So all of a sudden, Stitch went from being a gang leader to being basically an orphan. Now, same thing, he lands in Hawaii, but what is he missing? A family. What does Lilo and Nani offer him? They offer him a family. It's an offbeat family. It's a broken family. But the whole idea of Aloha is that you can make a family out of whatever you want. A family can be a group of friends. A family can be anything you want it to be. It doesn't have to be blood relatives. So suddenly we have the ultimate orphan landing in the one place on earth that has really the ultimate interpretation of family. And at that point, I thought, okay, we've got it. Didn't know everything when we jumped into it. We had a great character and great situation, but while we worked on the story, it got simpler and stronger. Gang, gone. Stitch, a one-off. And now he is a baby, and he's weirder. Instead of being diabolical and really smart, he is smart, but he doesn't have like this giant plan. Now he's just impulsive. He could be more impulsive and more unpredictable. And so he got way better during the story process.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And I think it's such a gem in the history of animation. Also the connection with the setting, the mix of genres, this family drama connected to the space adventure as well. It's fantastic. How do you think AI will impact the animation industry for future generations?
This is the thing that keeps me up at night. I fear mostly for story artists. The idea that somebody is going to sit at a microphone or at a keyboard and just type in some command codes and pull up a storyboard. There's a lot of studios that know better, but there's probably a lot of people out there that don't have as much money as a big studio, and this is a shortcut, and we'll see what happens. Now, I know that aspects of the industry are already on top of this and dealing with it. I know that the Writers Guild, Directing Guild, they're dealing with it and finding a way to keep that stuff from being legal to use. I think it's mostly, my biggest concern is with story, because that's where I started out. And I talk to young story artists all the time. And I always advise them, like, story is the place to be. Learning story will prepare you to do anything else, to direct, to write, even to be a better layout artist. Because if you're thinking about story, then your work is going to work better. So that's my main worry, is just, I think, the storyboarding process. My name showed up on a list of people, that whole, what was it called? It was that giant leak that came out. What was her name?
Midjourney.
Yeah, I'm on the Midjourney list. That was horrifying. And the thing I really don't understand, I don't understand why somebody can come into my house and steal something and I can have the police capture them and prosecute them. If they stole my drawings from my house, they would go to jail. But if they steal my style, nothing happens. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm extremely upset by the idea that people are out there working very hard to put people out of work. It makes no sense to me. Putting that power in people's hands in one way is yay, if it's helpful, but allowing people who don't bother learning the craft, like, oh, great, I can just push a button now. Ah, look what I made. Oh my God, like, people have stolen my artwork, recolored it, and put it online. Look what I drew. There's a lot of people out there that don't get the boundaries, that don't have that sort of, like, I guess, integrity. No, you can't just photocopy or scan or steal off the internet somebody else's work, put your name on it, and it's suddenly yours. There's a lot of people that don't get that.
I think that what's great is that it sounds like the tactic will be so big and so fast. It's going to be such a tsunami. We're going to get all the audience, the public, to use that so much and depend on that it will be too late. Another thing that I see is that once you have a trained eye, all that goes into a character design and everything that goes, all the tiny little details and choices that a real artist makes, that you see a big difference.
Yes. I was just thinking while you were saying that as well, you can't type in or talk into the microphone of AI and go, give me an adorable character that everybody's going to fall in love with. It's not going to work. That's where I think AI is, like, everything is going to equalize in some way. When digital music came out, it was like, oh, records are dead. Records are still around. There's a shift and then a correction. When I go to some art sites and I look at everybody's AI art, it all looks the same. It looks the same. It is characterless, it is personalityless. And yeah, I just saw one of Abraham Lincoln at the Super Bowl, and it kicks out 25 versions of that. Great. It's worthless. That's the other thing. I can do a drawing and ink it, an original actual drawing. Oh my God, here's one right here. A drawing I made on a piece of paper, a real piece of paper, right? And that is worth something. But if you make something on a computer and do multiple prints, those prints aren't worth anything unless you promise to go back and destroy the original program. Yeah, you've got to be careful. If you don't understand the craft, if you don't understand story, if you've never disciplined yourself to work on a story, you could talk into a computer or type things in all day long, and you're eventually just going to get a series of images that don't add up to anything.
The next questions come from our Write for Animation Academy members. If you want to join a community of passionate storytellers and bring your career to the next level, join today from writeforanimation.com/academy. I cannot wait to meet you in our next session. Now a question from Shailene. She is one of our Write for Animation Academy members, and she asks, what motivates you when you're feeling discouraged or empty in the middle of a project? From a fellow Colorado Springs writer.
Find someone to work with. I say, when I would be beside myself thinking I'm stuck, I could go down the hall and talk to another story artist. Or in the case of co-directing, which I really enjoy, you're co-director, it's like, what are we going to do? Relying on other people. Don't think you have to do all this stuff yourself. And one of the things I learned from Joe Ranft, which I was very impressed by, when you bump up against something in a story and it won't budge, you got to go around it. Like, you can't force things. So if there's something that's not working, back up, take another look at it, and try working around it. I know that's a little bit vague, but sometimes when things are not working in a story, it's a sign. It's a sign that it's not supposed to be there, right? The How to Train Your Dragon thing, they had a big problem. Yep. They couldn't figure it out, and they kept bumping up against it, and they did not back up and take another look at it. And so when Dean and I came on, it was a fresh set of eyes that were like, oh, let's back up and go around this problem. So rely on your friends. Find partners that share your sensibilities. When I work with Dean Deblois or with Kirk D'Amico, we will work on a movie and we're working on the same movie. He's not making a drama while I make a comedy. He's not making a thriller while I'm making a drama. We're all doing the same thing. There have been pairings of directors and writers where their sensibilities are very different, and that causes trouble. When I work with Dean Deblois, we'll divvy up all the different sequences in a story, and he'll say, I'll take sequence 5, you take sequence 6, oh, great. And so when I work on sequence 6, I'm not going to do a sequence 6 like he would have, but it will fit into the same movie. So I will have my unique take on it, but sensibility-wise, it tonally will fit. Look for partners that you trust, that might be even smarter than you, that share your sensibilities.
We have another one is from Dorshan, also part of the group, and he asks, what is the difference between working for Disney compared to DreamWorks?
In the largest sense, although I think it's changing over time, studios evolve. When I first came to DreamWorks, they were more edgy. You go to work for Disney, you just get it. It's like you're doing these movies that have a lot of emotional ballast. You want to do movies that are earnest, and I think in a sense wear their hearts on their sleeves. And I really like that. And I think that DreamWorks was a little more, Jeffrey always said, like, Disney makes movies for the kids and all of us, and I make movies for the adults and the kids. So there's a middle ground there. In the Venn diagram, they cross over, right? So I think, yeah, DreamWorks is a little more edgy and stuff. And right now, one of the things that's really cool about working at DreamWorks, stylistically, this place is really adventurous and innovative. Puss in Boots had this painterly style that was just amazing. And I love that, because animation has gotten to a point where what we were so amazed by with CG for so many years eventually started looking a little tired. Oh my gosh, I can see every single piece of fur on that bear. It's amazing. Now you're like, oh, it looks like a Ralph's commercial, because everybody can do it, right? Just in the nick of time, Spider-Verse came out and blew everybody's minds. Like, wait, we can do that kind of stuff? That's the kind of stuff I want to do. So now animation has finally gotten to the point where we lost some things when we went to CG. We lost this analog warmth that you had in Bambi and that you had in Lilo and Stitch. But now we can get it back. For me, the most important tool that we got when we got CG animation was camera movement. We could never dolly forward in a shot. You could zoom in and zoom out, but dollying forward is completely different. Things change in dimension, and there's a huge emotional impact with that. We got so many things when we got CG. So now we finally have all the camera freedom, and we now can start bringing in a more painterly, individual look. So these films can now, once again, they started looking all the same. Now they can start looking different again. And that's the coolest thing I think about being here and having my, friends over at Sony that I get to look at their stuff and like, whoa, they're blowing my mind. Yeah. They're like, they're inspiring me. And the other cool thing is, man, I just went to the Annie Awards. They were showing storyboards from The Boy and the Heron and stuff. And things just got bigger and broader. So now the hand-drawn stuff is like even cooler than it was before. Because it's just now it's one of a million different versions of something we could do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's exciting times. You can look at the bright side and also find so many things that are evolving in the industry that are super cool. And also, I think that some of these tools, when used with respect and to the artist, and maybe taking care of some of the more technical tasks, there's a respectful way and honest and with integrity, that then you can suddenly have multiple voices, and it's, or even the indie studios can create something that looks as cool and as polished as bigger studios. I'm loving this interview so much. So this comes from Oscar T. Flort 26. What's been your passion for being a screenwriter and director throughout your career? What kept you going?
The best way to get inspired for me is to read a book or go to a movie. I watch somebody else's movie and it can have nothing to do with what I'm doing, and just when I see a great movie with great characters, it just energizes me. And I'm like, I want to do that same thing. And I can go back to the thing I'm working on and I can do a better job. Artistic inspiration surrounds us all. And some days I don't feel like drawing. I go to my Pinterest board where I've collected my Glenn Keane drawings and my Shane drawings, my Beatrix Potter drawings or whatever. And I start looking through those, and before long, I'm like, I'm ready to draw. I was admiring your wall. I'm like, that makes me want to draw.
The idea was, after visiting Disney Animation Studios, and Juan Pablo Reyes, a producer there, he had this wall with just printouts, and you can find some of your characters as well. And I thought, that's such a cool idea and so simple to execute. That's what I loved visiting big studios, how, especially Disney, how they are like a museum. I've noticed something. We have this writing group. We write every day together in the Write Animation Academy. And some people are very discouraged by the fact of how hard it is to get into the industry. And I see how it's 1 in a million, or I don't live in LA, or I have this disadvantage. And I'm thinking more and more about what is the right mindset to everyone that feels a little discouraged about how difficult it is to get your foot in the door.
I came in to the studio here the most basic way possible. I got a portfolio together and I submitted it. Nothing magical about that. The unfortunate reality is that you need producers to get a movie made. Somebody has to have the money and the organizational skills to get something made. And there are different scales. Disney is amongst the biggest, and Sony and stuff. And I gravitated towards Disney and loved it, loved every minute of it. But I started at a very simple position. I was a story artist. I started in the development department, then I moved into story, and I stayed in story. I'm basically still in story. I just never left. Directing is an extension of story. So I do advocate, I know there's a million different ways to get into this. I always advocate like looking for a studio and get the most basic position that you can. I always recommend story. Storyboarding is always in demand. We always need good story artists. If a great story artist came in here that drew really well, we'd make a spot for them. We can always use somebody who's really good. I guess the only advice I would have is don't think you have to get something big made right away. You will likely work on other people's projects and do their stuff. And I worked on Rescuers Down Under, then I got to work on Beauty and the Beast. And I was just doing story, nothing super high profile, but I learned. And eventually I drifted into a spot where I became a head of story on Mulan, and I did a good enough job with that after I was finished, Tom Schumacher said, is there anything you want to do? Is there any stories you want to make? So it took me many years before I got to the point where I was like, okay, now I get to try. So I'd say try not to be discouraged. And I will say this, Jeffrey Katzenberg said something once I've never forgotten. We're always told since we're kids to believe in yourself, follow your dreams. If I dreamt of being an opera singer, it ain't going to work. I have a terrible voice. It ain't going to happen. What Jeffrey said was, no, follow your talent. Don't follow your dreams, follow your talent. I believe it's a kind of a combination of the two. But if you are a terrible draftsman, storyboarding is probably not your future. Maybe you're a better writer. If you're a great writer, write. So follow your talent.
That's a beautiful way to conclude. I will listen to you for hours. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. This was fantastical. That was an amazing, one of my favorite interviews. If you want to work in a studio, it's important that you connect with the industry. And a great way to do this is by attending film festivals. Watch this video where a former Netflix recruiter helps you gather all the things you need to succeed at an animation festival. I'm Pietro, this is Write for Animation, and I'll see you there.